Hello and welcome to the Truth, Health, Freedom podcast. My guest today is club and radio DJ turned author and researcher, Mark Devlin. So welcome, Mark Devlin.
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me on, mate.
Now, you're very welcome. It's a real honor and a pleasure to have you on. Mark is the author of a couple of books recently. That's Musical Truth and Musical Truth 2. Now, there are many, many interviews and presentations out there which go deeply into the content of these books. Could you just briefly explain to anyone who's not familiar with your work what these are? And then we're going to move on to other subjects that haven't been covered so much in your other interviews to give something fresh to the audience. So what's the gist of these two books, Musical Truth and Musical Truth 2?
Sure. Well, these two books bring together everything I've come to understand about the true nature of the corporate music industry and the entertainment industry generally, and how its activities fit into the wider picture of what's really going on in the world. And not only that, but what this world really is, the true nature of it. And all of that is very different to what we've been trained to think all our lives, and the official version of things that we get from government ministers, the BBC, Wikipedia, universities, academies. It turns out that all of these things are expressions of the control system that we live under, and they want us to think about everything in a certain approved way that suits them. They don't want us to go digging for information off our own backs. They don't want us being critically minded truth seekers that go wherever our own research takes us. I think George Carlin had a comment like that in one of his famous routines, where he said they want people that are just about smart enough to be able to operate all the machinery to keep the control system going, but not smart enough to question the true nature of what it is that they're involved in and how they're being shafted the whole time. So that's pretty much what it is. And I wanted to put all my understandings and comprehensions of this dynamic into these two books. So the first one came out in 2016, and it was the result of 5 years worth of research into different facets of how the music industry is used for mind control, social engineering, sowing certain beliefs and value systems and thoughts in the minds of the general public on a subconscious subliminal level, and all the different methods and tactics that are used, and also naming some names and taking some very familiar groups and musicians and looking into some of the affiliations they've got and some of the family backgrounds and some of the agendas that they've been used to push. And there was more of that in volume 2, which came out earlier this year. As you can imagine, with work of this nature, when you're calling out people's heroes and gurus and people that they put up on pedestals and revere as demigods, you get quite a bit of backlash. And I've copped quite a bit of flack for putting this information out there, but on the whole, I've received a great deal of support, and I do get correspondence every single day now. It takes me the first 2 hours of every day just to go through emails that have come in during the night. And it's people responding to various aspects of my work through the books or through the public talks that I've done or my radio interviews. And they've said, thank you for this information. You've really opened my eyes up to this particular group. Have you looked at this bit of information, or have you considered this strange affiliation that they've got? Or have you looked at this particular musician? Here's a bit of information for you. And people are getting in touch all the time with that type of stuff. So it seems that this style of research has become very fashionable. That's people just doing work off their own backs and digging into information that is in the public domain. It's readily available on the internet, and people are just pulling together all these disparate, eclectic bits of information from all over the place and seeing what patterns form and how things start to emerge. The big picture starts to come together. And this is a fairly recent phenomenon, I think, people just becoming citizen researchers on this basis. And so much is getting pulled together now. We're just discovering so much about what has laid dormant for decades. It's information that has been available to research should anyone want to delve into it, but it's only in recent times that people have felt compelled to do that. And so we're discovering so much now. So much has come to light in just the last 3 or 4 years, which was really hidden from public view before that. So I'm happy that my books have played a part in that process. And of course, there were many other authors and researchers that influenced me to set off on this path in the first place, but many others are now doing it, and it's a great thing. And we're discovering so much more about the world that we live in and what it's all about, and who some of these lifetime actors, as I refer to them as, really are, and the reason why they've been given these public roles, the reason why they're celebrities, the reason why they have an influence on culture and the way people think about things. That's a very long-winded answer, but that's basically what these books are about.
Fantastic. So we don't need to read them now. Fantastic.
Well, you should still read them, really.
Yeah, definitely. And listen to some of the other interviews and lectures. There's loads online. Now, you just mentioned there, you've been inspired by others and you learn from others, and you continue to learn from people all around the world in these 2 hours worth of emails that you need to get through every morning. So that's obviously one of the plus sides of the internet age, is that all this information is so readily available and people can connect in this way to really start to put the bigger picture together. Who are your greatest inspirations in this work? Who are your teachers?
Well, it was David Icke that got me started. As I've mentioned in many previous interviews, it was his books that first caused me to look at the world in a different way and to scrutinize things and to ask questions and to not necessarily believe the official version of things that we're presented with. So he first got me on the path, and really for the first couple of years, I was solely into the work of David Icke. I read all his books, I listened to all his lectures, caught every radio interview that he did. And I realized after a while that it wasn't too healthy to just be hanging on the words of one particular researcher, and that actually a better way of going about things is to take in information from a wide variety of different people from different walks of life, different parts of the world, that are focusing on different parts of this big picture. So Icke was sort of entry-level material for me, really, and then I progressed on to looking at other people's work. I would say the researchers who have had the most impact on me would be Mark Passio. I've learned so much about streetwise spirituality, as he calls it, and natural law, and all these other different spiritual components from his work. Jan Irvin over at Gnostic Media, he's calling his operation Logos Media these days, so he's changed the name of it. He's been through a few changes recently. We won't get into those, but his work on social engineering, culture creation, and lifetime actors has taught me a whole lot. I learned a lot about how the intelligence communities, specifically the CIA, but also MI5, MI6, Tavistock Institute, all these different organizations, have had a stranglehold on how culture has been presented to us over the past several decades, and subsequently how people have come to think about certain things and have taken on different moral values. All of that has been engineered rather than something that's happened organically. And also Joe Atwill, that used to do shows with Jan Irvin, but he doesn't anymore. Joe Atwill coined the term lifetime actors, and that's really been a big revelation to me, and it's helped me to slot a lot of the material that I deal with into that category and understand why certain people behave the way they do and why they've become popular. And who else would there be? Well, Dave McGowan, the late Dave McGowan, whose work on Laurel Canyon, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, was hugely inspirational to me. Again, he was looking at family backgrounds and affiliations and associations that many prominent musicians have had. And that was a real eye-opener, because you imagine that these people have got there through just working really hard and crossing their fingers for good luck. But his work showed me that actually no, the presence of the military and intelligence communities is usually not far from the surface, and many other unsavory elements seem to be tied in with that as well. So really it would be that ragtag bunch that have had the most effect on me, I would say.
Interesting. And among those people there, you mentioned Mark Passio, you mentioned streetwise spirituality, and you mentioned natural law. How do, as a researcher, you're researching a lot of things that are very much in this very nuts and bolts world. You can see how someone does activity X and that gets result Y. Now, among your research, it does seem to go deeper, and it does seem to touch on spirituality and natural law. So how does that tie in, and what have you learned about these subjects, and how does that influence your life and your outlook now, and how you behave on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, I think the way both of my books end is going to take a lot of people by surprise, because I spend the whole book going through all the nuts and bolts of how all this mind control trickery and all these shenanigans get done. And then when you get to the final chapters, I don't know what people are expecting to find, but what they do find is that I go into spiritual and metaphysical realms, and I show how everything that happens in this apparently physical world ties into the concept of free will, consenting, and natural law, and how that all works. There are many researchers out there that look at the chicanery of the music industry and all these different aspects of conspiracy. You can have researchers looking into the true story of 9/11 and false flag terror events and vaccines and the banking scams and all this sort of thing. But if that's as far as you go with it, and you just present the idea that everything's really fucked up and we're just being mind controlled and manipulated the whole time, good night, then you're really missing a major part of the picture. And I think a lot of truth and conspiracy researchers don't go far enough in examining these spiritual components and asking even bigger questions than what really happened on 9/11. Questions like, what is the true nature of this reality in which we find ourselves? Why are we here in the first place? Why is all this being done to us? Who are these individuals that are doing it? What can we learn from it? What are we, how are we supposed to respond to all this? So I came across natural law quite early on in my research. It's called many different things. It's referred to as spiritual law, universal law, the law of cause and effect, consequentialism. I think the basic tenets of it lie at the roots of most major religions, all the orthodox religions. When you strip away all the dogma and all the rules and regulations that come through these various holy books, you can't do this on a Friday, you must eat this type of food, you must wear this on your head. When you get rid of all that, you get down to the core roots of these religions and how they started out. They seem to have originated with an understanding of these same spiritual components, which are everywhere. And they have been set into place by the creative force behind everything. So many people would choose to call that entity God. I just refer to it as the creator. And it's a set of laws and conditions which are universal. They apply everywhere. They're unwavering. They never change. And they're eternal. And it doesn't matter whether any one individual doesn't accept it, doesn't believe in it, doesn't like it. It goes on being this way regardless. And we can see this just through observation. You can see how these dynamics play out in cause and effect. You put certain behaviors into the world, into physical manifestations, and there will be consequences that will come down upon you. And this happens on both an individual basis and a collective basis. So a society in general reaps the consequential results of their collective behaviors in the same way that an individual does. And as I say, it doesn't matter whether anyone believes this or not. You get people that are very steeped in their own egos, and everyone's got an opinion, Alan. I don't know if you've noticed, but you find this in YouTube arguments and Facebook threads. Everyone's got a goddamn opinion. And someone will say, oh, no, it's this way. This is what it's all about. Somebody else, no, you're wrong. It's this. And people state these opinions with absolute certainty. Like, there's no room for doubt. They're right. They've got to be right. And if you don't agree with them, then you're wrong. So you get people saying, oh, natural law doesn't apply. That's bullshit. It doesn't exist. We're not bound by it. Really? Do you think that a set of conditions put into place by the creative force behind this universe, and therefore everything within it, gives a toss whether David Smith of Eastbourne doesn't believe it? You think natural law is going to go, well, I was eternal, unwavering, and universal, but if David Smith of Eastbourne doesn't believe in me, I guess I won't apply to him. I'll just apply to everyone else and leave him out of it. It doesn't work that way. We are bound by these conditions. And as I say, it dishes out consequences which are appropriate to the thoughts and emotions and behaviors that we choose to put into the world, because this is where free will comes in. It's our greatest gift as humans. It's what sets us apart from animals who are instinctual creatures and don't have the capacity to make moral decisions for themselves. But we do, and we're held to account for these decisions by natural law. So the reality about this place is that it's somewhere we consent to come to learn the lessons that we've decided we need in a higher form, our higher selves, our spirit souls, because we're spirit souls having a temporary human experience, and these bodies in which we find ourselves are merely the vehicles through which we have that experience. One day we'll leave these vehicles, these bodies, the work will be done, they'll be of no further use to us. Our spirit souls go on existing, but the body just rots away because it's a temporary thing. But certain conditions had to be in place in order for us to get these lessons and gain these experiences that we've decided we need. So I don't believe there's a tyrannical God that orders us into these bodies, into these lives, and forces us to come into this apparently physical realm. I believe that it's consensual and free will is everywhere. So before we got here, we consented to have these lives and to go through these different experiences that we are. And the basic framework for the lives that we're living was set out before we got here. Obviously, there's the component of free will, which means that we can put some fine detail on it and we can make decisions as we go and take the consequences of those decisions. But the basic blueprint of who we're going to be and what part of the world we're going to grow up in and what people we're going to interact with, I believe, is something that we set out for ourselves before we get here. So in order for us to have these experiences, certain conditions had to be in place in this world. And I think we're all the co-creators of this reality in which we find ourselves. We basically constructed this reality for ourselves so that we could have our collective experiences and interact with each other. So one of the things that had to be in place here is duality, where every value has a diametrically opposed value, a polar opposite. It's conditions that can veer from one extreme to another according to the nature of the will and the consciousness that's applied to the situation. So you can have good, you can have evil. We have things like night and day, light and dark, the sun and the moon, male and female. These are all dualities that don't exist outside of this realm. They're in place here as a necessary condition, but once we leave this place, there's no duality, there's just a oneness. And one of those dualities is the capacity that we have as humans to veer towards love and goodness and our spiritual connectedness to source and to each other, and the capacity that we have to veer towards the polar opposite of that, which has to be in place because we have choices and we have free will. So you have to be able to choose the opposite if you so wish. And so we have the capacity for great evil. There's a darkness that lies within the human condition that is ready to be tapped into anytime someone chooses that they want to go that way. Or, I would add, any time that they're manipulated or coerced to go down that route. So I think the vast majority of people in the world today have adopted very much a satanic mindset, which people are going to be horrified to hear, and they're going to reject that and just not accept it at all. But what is Satanism? What is a satanic mindset?
Yeah,
it's basically...
I'm shocked. I'm shocked as well. So, yeah, I'm very interested to hear how you expand. Okay. Yeah, definitely. Please do.
Okay, well, Satanism is not what we've been entrained to think it is, along with just about everything else in our lives. So society kind of conditions you to think of it as devil worship and people in robes gathering around a fire at 3 o'clock in the morning sacrificing chickens or whatever. And I'm sure that does go on. But Satanism really is a spiritual state or a state of consciousness whereby you're in total servitude to self. And you're paying no regard whatsoever to how your thoughts, emotions, and actions might affect others, other humans, other sentient beings, and creation generally. So you're thinking about me, what suits me? What do I want right now? What do I need in my life? What is it going to take for me to get that? And bugger the consequences. Who cares who I have to trample over? Who cares who gets hurt? Who cares what happens as long as I get what I want? And most people are in that condition. They don't realize it, but as you're running about in the average day, taking care of your business, trying to get to work on time, trying to take care of all the things you need to do, trying to get enough money to feed your family and do everything else you need, you are actually adopting a mindset which is all about service to self and me. Most people do not think about how their actions are going to impact others in the big picture. And yeah, of course, we've been manipulated and coerced into that way of thinking through societal conditions. And we're not consciously setting out to be selfish in that way. But nevertheless, those are the behaviors that we exhibit. And through free will, the opportunity is always there to get into a level of consciousness where you start considering how your behaviors are going to affect others. And you start asking moral questions like, is this going to have a detrimental effect on others if I undertake this action? This is where you get the tenet of do no harm, the non-aggression principle within natural law, which can be stated as do not treat others in a way you would not wish to be treated yourself. And by the way, that applies to other sentient living beings, not just humans. And it can be expressed more simply as do no harm. And then you have the non-aggression principle, which extends that by it becomes do no harm but take no shit, basically. And the take no shit bit means don't put any harm into the world, but if other people are trying to take away your rights to personal freedom and rights that have been endowed to you by the Creator, and they've got no right to do that, then you reserve the right to do whatever it takes to preserve your rights and make sure people are not exploiting you and taking away things that don't belong to them. So these are all understandings that I came to realize a while back. And this aspect of being able to delve into the dark side of human nature, if we choose to, or if we allow ourselves to be coerced into, it's something that has been explored through lots of works of popular culture. There's the book and the film, The Lord of the Flies, by William Golding, which is really great. I remember studying the book at school, and there's a really good film adaptation of it. And it's a bunch of kids that get shipwrecked on this deserted island somewhere, and they have to make the best of their situation and learn to survive in the wild as a community until they get rescued. And the group sort of splits into two factions. There are two leaders that emerge out of the group, and one of them is trying to maintain some civilization and some humanity and, benevolent, decent ways of communal living. And the other leader which emerges is going very much down the dark route of the human soul, delving into that dark side and becoming very primitive and very animalistic and just reverting back to these primal states. And it's a really good study of how both of these options are available to us, depending on which route we choose to go down.
And it's all a choice, that it all comes down to free will, consent, choice at the end of the day.
That's right.
Yeah, so at what point did you come to this knowledge, and how has this influenced your life? Has it influenced your life, your thinking, your behavior day to day?
Well, yeah, it has. Discovering all this information about how the music industry is not what we thought it was, and how we've got an elite ruling class control system that is basically very evil and is seeking to genocide us, and those that they don't genocide, they just want to completely control. They want to control our spirituality, our consciousness, our humanity. It's dark and devastating stuff. And a lot of people say to me, well, don't you get depressed with this? Doesn't it get you down? How can you continue dealing with all this stuff? You've got a family, you've got kids, doesn't it affect how you relate to them? And I say, well, it has affected me, but not in a negative way, I would say. I would say that I've become a more moral person through discovering all this information. Not just the conspiratorial stuff, but by coming across natural law and studying how that works and how we get what we deserve, basically. What you put out, you get back. Every action has a reaction, cause and effect. So coming to these comprehensions has caused me to make a few changes in my own life. During all those years I was a DJ, I was out there doing all the clubs and doing radio shows and stuff, and really I lived just for that. Nothing else really mattered to me. I was in quite a satanic, selfish mindset myself. All I could think about was, where's the next gig? Where's the next party? How much am I going to earn from doing this? Just, getting bookings and maintaining my profile as a DJ and networking and meeting artists and all this sort of thing. It's all that mattered to me. I just saw myself as a DJ and nothing else. And gradually all that started to wane as I came across this information, to the point that I just couldn't give a damn about any of that stuff now. It's just completely meaningless. I look back at those years and all those things that used to be important to me now just mean nothing. The most important thing to me now is living in truth and recognizing my connectedness to everyone and everything else, and communicating that as widely as I can through the gifts that I have and the opportunities that have been made available to me. So, I spent all those years as a radio DJ, and I'm now putting to use many of those skills that I picked up to communicate truthful, empowering information to other people. That's the kind of contribution I want to be making now. Service to creation rather than service to self. And I think in my day-to-day activities, I'm a more moral person. I do pause before I undertake any behavior to consider whether it's going to put any harm into the world, whether it's going to have a detrimental effect on others before I do it. That's a question that everyone needs to ask before they undertake any behavior. And I just think I'm a nicer person, to be honest. I think most people would agree that I'm a nicer guy to get on with now than I used to be. So it has changed me in major ways, but I would say it's changes for the best, because until you come to realize that we're all bound by these tenets and these principles under spiritual law, then you've got no real incentive to change your behaviors.
Okay, and as well as behaviors, i.e. your speech, your actions, do you try to discipline your thoughts as well? Because we can all think certain things that we wouldn't say out loud. Do you even take it to that level where you're really conscious of your thoughts and thinking, what would be a better way to look at this situation, look upon that person, that kind of thing?
Well, I find it's much more difficult to keep tabs on my thoughts than it is my behaviors. I'm in so many ways, I'm just the same as anyone else when it comes to that chatter that goes on in my mind and these little thoughts that flash into your brain in split seconds. So, yeah, I have the same thoughts as anyone else. Someone might cut me up on the road. Someone might get in my way while I'm walking, and I have some dark thoughts that come into my mind about things that I think that person deserves for doing that. These are just trivial examples, but I'm just being honest about it. I think the difference is whether you turn those thoughts into behaviors. So someone might walk in front of you in a crowd or something, or tread on your foot or something, and you might immediately get that instinctive urge to call them a wanker or push them or, something like that. But the difference is whether you actually do it or not. If you can restrain yourself from undertaking the behaviors and just leaving it at a thought, then you've made a decision. There are always consequences to be borne for your actions, both good and bad. So, if you make well-meaning, holistically intelligent decisions about something, then the consequences that come back to you are going to be consistent with that level of consciousness. But if you make a decision that is the opposite of that, then the consequences you reap in that circumstance are going to be consistent, and appropriate to that situation. So if you did decide to give somebody a shove and call them a wanker for treading on your foot, there's going to be a certain set of circumstances that transpire. They might turn around and clock you one, or worse. But if you can leave it at a thought and not put that action into physicality, then the consequences are much better. That's a pretty dumb example, I guess. It's a pretty trivial example, but I hope it illustrates how these dynamics work. I mean, the thing about free will and what you can do and how you can choose to tap into that dark side of human nature if you feel so compelled has many different playouts and examples as well. So you can choose to be a rapist or a murderer if you want. I mean, this is the thing about free will. God or the creator doesn't stop someone from committing murder. If somebody sets out to do that and the will is there, they're going to do it. That's the nature of this physical realm. That's the way consequentialism works. You can be a murderer. You can go out and rape somebody. Not a good idea to, wouldn't recommend it, but if you do that, the act gets put into physicality, but now you take the consequences of it. You can, another trivial example would be if you're a man that really likes women and wants to go out and shag loads of women and become a player, a gigolo, you can do that as well. But there's going to be consequences available to you that are appropriate to that kind of behavior. So, you might end up shagging some bloke's wife and he's not the sort of bloke you want to mess with, and, there's going to be consequences for that. You might end up getting an STD if you live that kind of lifestyle. You might live that way for a couple of decades and then suddenly find yourself in middle age regretting the fact that you've never found true connectedness and true love with one partner, and you've never found that level of commitment, and you never had kids because you were too busy having fun, and you find yourself with that set of consequences for your behavior. I mean, I'm just using some examples here. Whatever actions you choose to put out there, you reap the consequences. And as I say, this happens on a collective societal basis as well as an individual basis. So look around at the situation that we all have to live under in the UK right now. We've got a parliament, a government that is infested with paedophiles. There are paedophiles in all levels of the establishment and business and academia and all these different expressions of government and the military. There's enough examples that have been exposed in the alternative media for us to know this is the case. Obviously, if you only ever watch the BBC and get all your information from mainstream sources, you might want to argue that point. But anyone that's paying attention, anyone that's actually done the research understands this. So why have we got a society where paedophilia is rampant? Well, I guess it must mean that collectively we deserve it. Collectively, we've brought this upon ourselves. And people would argue that, well, nobody wants there to be paedophiles. Nobody's set out to wish this to be the case. Well, probably not, no. I think the vast majority of human society would find that kind of thing utterly repellent. And if they really did understand that it was going on to such a major degree, they would be absolutely revolted by it and would hopefully rise up and take action. But the reason we've got this situation is through lack of care, because people just have not exercised appropriate spiritual care. This is another aspect of natural law. You're supposed to consider your part in the big picture and how your actions affect everyone else's reality. And it's because not enough people give a shit, Alan, to put it bluntly. Not enough people give a shit about what's going on, going back to that satanic mindset where people are just thinking about themselves. People just have not taken the time and the personal responsibility to look into how natural law, or any other name you want to put on it, affects them in their lives and affects society in general. And they've just not paid enough attention to the way we're supposed to be living our lives, and these tenets of do no harm but take no shit. So you're not supposed to undertake actions that put harm into the world, but you're also not supposed to take any shit. You're not supposed to put up with injustice. You're not supposed to put up with slavery and oppression. You're supposed to have some dignity and some self-respect. And when you see these things going on, you're not supposed to just sit back and accept it or say, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. You have a responsibility under natural law. You have a responsibility to creation to not accept that. And of course, no one individual or even a small group of individuals can fix the kind of problems that we're facing in society, because they're so deep rooted and they've been going on for so long. But large numbers of people, all engaged on the same path, on the same page, all understanding what needs to be done and pooling their consciousness and coming together, can find these solutions and can take action that is necessary to turn things around. You know, the day that we get to a substantial proportion of society that understand the spiritual principles that we're bound by and understand morality and the personal responsibilities that we have, is the day that this situation gets turned around, not a day before. But that day can come anytime enough of us want it. Unfortunately, though, because of societal mind control and because of the way that people are just dumbed down through all sorts of things, food and drink additives, all the crap they're spraying in chemtrails that we're inhaling, and all the stuff that goes into vaccines and fluoride in the drinking water and all this stuff that's been so well researched, people are just dumbed down, and, you know, so many of them just don't seem to be capable of this kind of critical thought and have taken on these understandings. So we're facing some monumental challenges, but it's always a choice. You know, a famous routine of Bill Hicks's was everything's a choice between fear and love. And there it is, just encapsulated within that statement. We're living in a society that is ruled by evil. Who really can deny that? But it never had to be that way. And it doesn't have to continue to be that way. We can all change it collectively, consciously, anytime enough of us choose to.
So individually, what do we do? And do you see signs? Do you see signs of a change? You know, through you've changed, you've learned something, it's changed your behavior, you're doing what you can to put things out into the world. Do you see much of this out there elsewhere? You know, you're getting emails every day, so some people are on board with this kind of thing. They're wanting to make a difference. Do you see signs that give you hope that this collective might grow to that tipping point that pushes things in the right direction?
I'm seeing small signs, but I don't get drunk and giddy on this idea that there's a mass awakening of human consciousness happening, which you hear some researchers stating. So a lot of them will say, everyone's waking up and it won't be long now until everyone discovers the true nature of this control system and we take back our freedom. It's going to take a very, very long time for that to happen, I feel. And it's going to be a multi-generational thing. I don't expect to see any major results in my lifetime, and probably not for another few generations. But there are small glimmers of hope. And I get it from many of these emails that I receive. As I say, people get in touch every day and they say, you know, your work has opened my eyes so much. And I never say that to blow my own trumpet and put myself on a pedestal and make out that I'm great. I'm just making my own personal contribution and I'm paying it forward. And I've taken the baton from other researchers that have inspired me, as I said at the start, and I'm just running with it and doing what I can. And to hear that I have been able to influence people and change their thoughts and their behaviors is a very encouraging thing. And now I hope that these people, having been inspired by me, are going to go out and communicate this to others. And there's going to be this snowballing effect where this knowledge and these spiritual understandings can just grow exponentially. but it's a process that is going to take a very long time, in my view. I think the control system is throwing everything that they've got at us now to such a major degree that you really do have to be in a major state of denial or dumbed down, calcified consciousness to not realize that something is going wrong. Anyone that can look around at the world today and think that everything's basically okay, everything's fine, there's the odd glitch here, the odd niggle, the odd war here, the odd political situation there, but everything's basically okay. We can just carry on and go to the mall and spend money and eat and watch TV and drink beer. Everything's fine, really. Everything's okay. Anyone that really thinks like that, I don't know what it's going to take to shake them out of that mindset. So just last week, we had the spectacle of all these football fans at the news of England playing against, God, who were they playing against? See, this is how little I care about. I can't even remember.
Sweden, then Croatia.
All right, so it must have been the match with Croatia. I mean, it means nothing to me. But I heard stories of England fans going on the rampage. This was even before the game, I think, and setting fire to ambulances and destroying bus stops and just behaving like depraved animals. And you can look at some of the emotional responses that people give to the news of their football team winning. And you'll literally see grown men weeping, raising their voices, veins standing out on their forehead. They're going purple in the face with passion and energy because 22 men kicking a sack of wind around a field means so much for them and really is their life. And you think, just look at all that passion and energy that's going into a goddamn football game. Can you imagine if that passion and energy was instead channeled into something that actually matters and actually benefits humanity and creation in general, such as, for example, maybe rising up against a tyrannical elite political system that seeks to enslave us all through the fiat money system and is seeking to keep us all enslaved through taxation and is looking to poison us by dumping chemicals in the skies every day, and all these other different things that they're doing to us, both covertly and subliminally. Imagine the number of people that got all upset and bent out of shape over the results of a football game, instead applying that to the way we're all being shafted by our elite controllers. Now, the day that happens is the day that some real change is going to come into this world. So I don't know what it's going to take to shift people out of caring about football games into caring about things that actually affect them and their children. So that's why I say we've got a long way to go. But I don't want to answer this question on a complete downer and say that I see no hope. I see glimmers of hope, and I see the process that needs to take place happening very slowly. So the only thing we can do, those of us that are already engaged on this path, is just to keep at it. We just got to keep doing what we're doing and not get despondent when we don't see major world change happening as a result of our actions. Realize that the change is probably going to come after we've left this place, but that's no reason to shirk the personal responsibilities that we have. We just got to keep doing the work, keep trying to wake others up and engage them on this path. You know what you need to do when you undergo a conscious awakening and you reconnect to your higher self. You know what to do. The answers just come to you. You know instinctively what is the right thing to do in certain situations and what is the wrong thing to do. So you just got to follow your heart in these matters and keep making whatever contribution you can towards turning things around. I think when you first get on this path, it was certainly this way with me. When I first read those books of Ike and I came to these staggering comprehensions of how the world was nothing like I thought it was. I wanted to evangelize. I wanted to shout from the rooftops. And there was a period where I would actually speak to anyone that would listen, even strangers on planes and things like that. And I'd say, do you realize this? And do you realize we're all being mind controlled by that. And it didn't take me long to realize that's not a good way of going about things. But I think it's something that's going to be familiar to many people. We understand these things, and then we just feel the need to tell everyone. But you discover with the passage of time, there are better ways, there are more effective ways of getting this information out, and you mature a bit and you get a bit more refined in your approach, I feel.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about is, obviously this has changed how you approach certain things in life and the little things that we can do. You know, you've mentioned family in this, and I know you have children. I don't know what age they are, but how does this knowledge affect how you raise your children? Are you able to teach some of it to them? Are they ready for it? And also, what do you allow them to watch and listen to? For example, musically, do you only allow them to hear certain things rather than the stuff that you've exposed as being the mass mind controlling stuff that's going to lower our consciousness and make our behavior and our spirituality of a more negative or darker nature? What are you able to do there, and how is that manifested in your life?
Well, I've got 2 little girls. They're going to be teenagers in a few years, so I'm certainly going to have my work cut out then, keeping them away from pop music and all the other things that are there to seduce teenage girls. So yeah, I'm under no illusion that I've got a lot of hard work to come. It's difficult, and I would never make the claim that I'm perfect and that the way I do things is the way that other people should do things. I've never claimed to be any kind of role model in that regard. I'm a flawed human being. I've got flaws. I'm very, very imperfect. So certainly nobody should look to me and the way I run my daily life and think that's a good idea. That's a good way to go about things. I mean, you can take on board the messages I put out and the basic principles and apply those to your own life. But in terms of the fine detail of the way I go about things, you know, it's what works for me, but it probably won't work for the next person. So, for instance, so many people in the truth movement, in inverted commas, will say you should homeschool your kids. You know, don't send them to these indoctrination camps run by the government where they just get steeped in mind control. And yes, in principle, I agree. If you can make that work for yourself, it is a really good idea to homeschool your kids. But it's not something that I've been able to make work for myself. I don't want to go into, you know, the fine detail of my home life, but homeschooling my kids is not a practical option for me. I'm just going to leave it at that. And it's not going to work for everyone. So a lot of people will criticize me for that and say, but Mark, you're putting truthful information out in the world. You understand what's really going on. How can you allow your kids to be indoctrinated by government mind control? Well, it becomes my job to do my bit as a parent and instill my influence to undo a lot of that mind control. You know, kids are going to be mind controlled whether they go to school or not. There are all kinds of influences that are going to affect them, even if they are homeschooled. So the responsibility of a consciously awakened parent becomes to make them understand that there are mind control influences and make them understand that they can't necessarily trust and believe everything that they're told by mainstream sources. So I've started that process with my kids, and I've put the idea into their heads that you can't necessarily believe everything your teacher says. Your teacher doesn't have all the answers in life. You certainly can't believe everything the BBC News says, or a government minister, or Wikipedia. I've instilled in them the idea that you should always investigate things for yourself. You should always ask questions. You should always scrutinize things, and you shouldn't be afraid to be different to others. You know, fitting into the crowd, going along to get along, is not necessarily a virtue. It's something that people do because it just makes their life easier to do what everyone else is doing, peer pressure. But I've tried to instill in them that it's okay to be different. It's okay if you want to do things that other people don't like doing, or it's okay to take a different approach to things. So I think they've understood that. I did print out a bunch of signs addressing the non-aggression principle in natural law. Do not treat others in a way you would not wish to be treated yourself, and posted those around the house a few years ago. So there's a sign in every room as a reminder. So you walk into a room and you see that sign. And I just try to say to them, you know, if they fight, which they do, because all siblings fight, they might be fighting over a toy, they might be fighting over an item of food or something like that, I'll just plainly and simply say to them, okay, you've just snatched that toy from your sister and you've scratched her and you've made her cry. Imagine she'd done that to you. You're playing with the toy, she comes along, snatches it from you, scratches you, makes you cry. Would you like that? Would that be nice? Is that something that you'd like to happen? No, it's not. So don't do it to her. You know, really, these principles of natural law do not cause harm to others, do no harm. They are so simple that literally a 5-year-old child could understand them.
Probably
And
best.
volumes. It speaks volumes that they don't teach this stuff in primary school, because they should be. I mean, who's going to have any kind of moral objection to kids being taught that if you wouldn't like a certain behavior done to you, don't do it to someone else? Full stop.
Yeah.
Who is going to look at that and say, "Oh, I don't want my kid learning that." No, that's not appropriate at all. Nobody could really object to that, and yet kids aren't taught this in school, and they should be. So these are things I've tried to instill in my kids at this very early age, and you know, it's going to be an ongoing process, and there's going to be many different challenges, but I think that's a fairly reasonable start.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your books, you've looked very much into the darker side of the music industry, and in your work, you would have been, you know, an unknowing part of that back in the day as a DJ. These days, how has all your research affected what you listen to, and what can the public out there do in terms of their own listening habits in order to get to listen to things and to produce music that is putting a more positive impact out into the world and a more positive impact on their own brains? How do you go about that, and what advice could you give to the people out there?
Well, that's a good question. In terms of music that I listen to, I can no longer listen to any mainstream radio station unless it's an oldies station. I've got to the stage where the only radio stations I can stand to listen to are ones that play 70s or 80s music. So anything more recent than that, I just can't stand to listen to it. It just grates at me and makes me feel bad. It makes me want to reach for the off button because I actually have a physical reaction to it. It starts to panic me, and I just want to either turn the music off or just get out of that environment so I don't have to hear it. And I'm the same way with ads. Whenever an ad comes on the radio, it just makes me feel physically repelled, and I have to get rid of it. So yeah. I think
is that the music as opposed to the lyrics? So even without the lyrics, would that be just the musical concept, the vibrations that are created?
Yeah, exactly. That's before I even get to the lyrics. I don't really pay a lot of attention to lyrics. It's the way the sound frequencies make me feel, the physical components of the song, or the sonic components, I should say. Just the way it resonates with me and the way it vibrates with me, it just doesn't feel good. And that goes for all mainstream pop music now. I was having a discussion with a guy the other day for one of my Good Vibrations podcasts, and we were talking about classic albums from back in the day, from pretty much the 60s and the 70s. These evergreen acts that are still being celebrated 40 or 50 years on. And we were saying, honestly, who is there from today's music scene that's going to be celebrated with any great enthusiastic nostalgia in even 10 years? Never mind 40 or 50. In 10 years, are people going to be saying, oh, Justin Bieber, he was great. I love Justin Bieber. His lyrics were just so incisive, and his music just really spoke to me in a really deep and spiritual way. It's not going to happen. I've just picked on Justin Bieber, but you could apply that to anyone. I mean, I'd even say that about Ed Sheeran. I know I'm going to get hate for that. There's going to be people saying, Ed Sheeran's great. How can you say that? But Ed Sheeran doesn't move me. Come on now. He's not exactly in the same category as David Bowie or the Rolling Stones or the Doors or the Beatles, is he? Come on now. Or Prince or any other act you might care to mention. So none of today's music does it for me. In terms of stuff that I do like to listen to, I do want to emphasize that there is still great, empowering, meaningful message music being made. And the reason I know this is because I put it together in my Sound of Freedom Conscious Music podcast every few weeks. So I've been doing this now for about 5 years, I think. And it's me digging around and having to go to many different sources and many times getting the music direct from the musicians themselves and putting it together into a showcase of music doing what it really should, inspiring you, moving you, speaking to you on a deep personal basis. And there's a lot of this stuff still being made. These are artists that people probably have never heard of. They're not household names. You're never going to hear them on the radio. You're never going to hear them ringing off down the club. You're never going to see them on any TV network. But the music's still being made. And the reason I put that podcast out is because I can do all the hard work and do all the bringing together of these tracks from different sources, and then people can just go to this one-stop shop and absorb it all, and I make it available to them because I want this music to get out there. So that's some good music that I think people should listen to. A lot of people say to me, you shouldn't really be listening to the classic stuff. You know, how can you still enjoy stuff from the Beatles, or how can you listen to Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd or, you know, one of these bands when you understand the connections that these musicians had and what these groups were most likely used for. And people try and make the case that there could be all sorts of stuff loaded into those audio recordings. And I always say that as long as you're consciously aware of what a band probably was all about, and as long as you're consciously aware of what may well have gone into the makeup of their music, you can still enjoy that music on the face of it. For the sake, you know, for the music's sake, you've broken the spell by that point. The mind control is no longer working on you in a way that it works on someone who doesn't have these understandings, who's being taken completely off their guard. You know, you can still enjoy these songs because many of these songs are great. You know, all these manipulated bands and artists that I've exposed, their music was fantastic. That's why they were so popular. If the music was crap, they wouldn't have got to where they were. And people may disagree with me on that, and certainly many people do. They say, you know, on the one hand, you point out who all these musicians really were, and then on the other hand, you say, go right ahead and listen to their music. Well, that's what I do. If you choose not to listen to these bands, and if you choose to throw out all your old albums and never associate with these acts again, that's your choice, you know?
Free will.
Yeah, if you feel compelled to do that, go ahead. That's your choice.
Yeah.
And this is mine.
It's a little bit like the what I thought of then was the quote from George Bush when he said, "Fool me once." You know, that quote that he misquoted, really famous one. You can find it on YouTube. And
God bless him. That was George Bush Jr., right?
George W. Yeah. Because
he wasn't the smartest of fellas, was he really?
No. Once you know the trick, it's not going to fool you again. So you can listen and appreciate the music, but the darker side of it is not going to affect you. Now, I'm really aware of the time. I'm aware that you've got to go. So I'm just going to, one final question, if you've got a moment.
Sure. No worries.
Yeah, okay. That's my one final question. I'd just like to ask, if you had one last talk, the internet's going to shut down tomorrow. You've got one last chance to give a message to the world, something that your family will hear, your kids will hear, your followers, you know, your audience will hear. What would you like to say? One last talk.
Ooh, never had that question before. Well, what springs to mind straight away is a quotation from a Roman emperor. I think his name was Marcus Aurelius. And he's supposed to have said, what we do in life ripples through eternity. And this was used as the basis for the tagline for the movie Cloud Atlas, which came out a few years ago from the Wachowskis. And I did a show with Kevin Martin called Mind the Gap just recently, where I really got into the whole narrative of Cloud Atlas and what that movie is trying to tell us. And in a nutshell, it's all about just not squandering the opportunities that are available to you in life. I think I started off this chat by saying that life is a temporary thing. We're just here for really a very short period of time. And what we do in that time really matters. And it has repercussions for both our eternal souls and where we're going to go when this life is up, and, what form we're going to exist in, and what kind of karmic payback there's going to be, because that's a very real thing. Answering for your chosen behaviors in life, that there is payback for that. People can differ on what form it will take, whether we judge ourselves in a higher form of consciousness, which I personally think is the case, or whether we are judged. But, karmic payback is a very real thing. I also happen to accept that reincarnation is a very real thing, and we don't just have one life. We come here many times as it's deemed necessary for us to evolve and grow the way we need to. And when that work is all done, we can get up out of here and move on to something better. So what we do in these lives is very, very important. It is tempting to spend life just doing what you want to do and pursuing pleasure and just doing leisurely, fun things that make you happy. You can do that. Again, it's a choice. But that's one option. Another option is doing what you know to be right, doing what you know you really should with the opportunities that have been afforded to you. And again, there are consequences that come down on you according to whichever decision you take. So, if that was the last message that I was able to impart to people, then I think it's a pretty useful one. What you do in life matters. So be mindful of that every day in what you decide to do with your time.
Wise words. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Now, where can people find you? If they want to look up your books, look at your lectures, listen to your musical shows, where can they find you?
Okay, well, my main website is markdevlin.co.uk, and there's links to everything else from there. My Spreaker account has all my audio, basically every podcast I've put out under my Good Vibrations brand, which is my conversation-based podcasts. All the archives for The Sound of Freedom, which is the conscious music show, they all reside at my Spreaker page. And all my radio interviews where I've jumped on other people's shows and podcasts and stuff, they're all archived on my Spreaker page. So I think that's Spreaker.com/DJ Mark Devlin. But either way, you can link through from the main site, markdevlin.co.uk. So my YouTube is youtube.com/MarkDevlinTV. All my radio interviews are converted to files up on YouTube, and all my conference presentations are up on there as well, or as many as were filmed. And then the two books, Musical Truth Volumes 1 and 2, are available on Amazon. But if people want to get a copy from me personally, a signed copy, we can cut Amazon out of the picture and just have a little, private arrangement. So people just got to drop me an email in that case to markdevlinuk@gmail.com. And I just want to thank you for getting me on, Alan. It's been good today to talk about some different stuff because, most interviews I do, and I'm actually winding down the amount that I do from this point on, because I mentioned to you off air that it gets quite exhausting and quite draining to keep doing these. And although it's important to get the information out, every time someone says to me, tell us about Paul McCartney or tell us about symbolism in Lady Gaga videos, a little piece of my heart sinks because I think I've got to go through all this all over again now. I've answered all these questions so many times in previous shows, and they're all there in the archives for anyone that wants to go back over them. And I just don't want to be answering all these same questions like 50 times because it really does drain you. So what's been good about today's show is that we've talked about some different stuff, that I don't normally get a chance to go into. And it's really made me think. And I've hopefully imparted some information that people are going to find useful. And I've really reached into the depths of my heart and soul to answer some of these questions. So it's been a useful experience. So thank you for inviting me on.
No, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are with work and family life and everything else.
Just a shade, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very, very much. And if you've got anything out of it and you've enjoyed it, then that's, that really pleases me as well. So, it's your show at the end of the day as well as my show, because, without you, wouldn't have the listeners. So thank you very, very much for coming on today. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, no worries. Thank you. And best of luck with the show and all your future guests, and keep doing what you're doing as well. We're all making our individual contributions, and we just got to stay on the path.
Thank you very much, Mark Devlin. Thank you.
All right. Okay.